Okay.
Ready? Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for February 22nd, 2016. We'll begin with the special order calendar. Continue hearing items first. Item number 1, 47237 BZ, 2765 Cropsey Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, they requested an adjournment on this. I don't know for how long though.
Item number 2, 19649 BZ, 1280 Allerton Avenue, the Bronx.
Okay. They provided photos from early February that indicate the graffiti was removed, as were the U-Hauls and the clothing bins. I'm not really clear where the tire storage is proposed to be, but it seems to have been removed. I didn't see it. Did you see?
No, the U-Hauls are still there. As
Oh, you went
of
by.
February 11th, I've been by several times.
Come on.
Including the night that the photos were taken. I happened to be there, and the U-Hauls were on the site again. And when you look at the photos closely, you'll see the U-Hauls are across the street.
Wow.
And the tire storage rack is still in the parking area.
And what's disturbing is if you do a Google search for information about U-Haul facilities in the Bronx, this property is listed as one, and I had called that number, and truck was available.
Uh-oh. Well, this isn't going to go
I'm sorry,
over
not
well.
truck, van was available.
The van. Okay, so how do we do this? We can't condition a grant on no U-Hauls if they're ignoring us completely.
No, they need to disassociate themselves with U-Haul, take themselves off of the website so that we can verify that they no longer are a dealer.
Right. Okay. Okay, and so we need to see proof of that.
Correct.
Okay. All right, and in the meantime, I don't know how long it takes to accomplish that. They may have contracts. I don't know how long it takes them to accomplish that. They need to do it quickly. But in the meantime, if the weather improves, they also are supposed to do landscaping, and so they should do that now. It's actually March is when you plant, so, okay. Next.
Item number 3, 52864 BZ, 2402 Northern Boulevard, Queens.
We have to adjourn this?
Item number 4, 12997 BZ, 150-65 Cross Island Parkway, Queens.
Also to adjourn?
Item number 5, 31806 BZ, 4905 Astoria Boulevard, also known as 2241 49th Street, Queens.
Okay, with this one, we haven't had an update on this application since April of last year. And there were 3 adjournments subsequently. None of the requested landscaping work was done, although they had spring and summer to do it, spring, summer, and fall. They explained that the rusted fence can't be removed because there's a tree. I don't actually understand that. You cut the metal away around the fence, and then you reinstall either in front or in back, or you make it an accommodation. There's not really a good excuse for that. They did install the right turn only sign. The spaces were numbered on the plans as we requested way back in April. They removed the temporary storage building from the plans. They paid all their ECB fines as of the end of January. And I believe they may have just submitted, photos of the conditions of the site, which it seemed to me showed a lot of signs. So, and I don't think all of those were shown on the drawings.
No, yeah, there are those new banners on the fence.
Like a lotto sign.
Yeah. So we need those signs removed or accounted for to make sure that they fit within the confines of the regulations. Okay, just a second. So here we are again, we're talking about we're talking about it coming into warmer months. I don't see why the landscaping shouldn't be done now, because we have a poor compliance history with them. So I think one of the reasons they waited this long was because they were trying to accomplish some of the work, but then they didn't finish it, and I don't know why. Okay.
New cases, item number 6, 12, 11, 22, 30, 81, sorry, 11, 22, 81 BZ, 105, 14 Historia Boulevard, Queens.
Okay, we need a community board recommendation, I didn't see that. I'd like to know whether the graffiti that was described in the statement of facts was removed? No, not. So it wasn't, okay.
And how do they intend to handle the graffiti problems in the future?
They're also using the corner lot, which for open storage on, and it's all, when you look in the lot, it's all
Pallets.
roofing materials.
Yeah.
And then they have shelving units which bring the materials well above the fencing. The fencing, well, first of all, it's an enlargement of their use.
Right. But you're sure that's associated with their?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's roofing materials. And when you look inside the building itself, it looks very cluttered with supplies, and I'm not really sure if a truck can come in and make that U-turn. I would like to see more photos of the interior. They do have 2 tree pits on, I guess it was 206 Street. One of the trees is dead, so they should replace that. And I believe they have to demolish the mezzanine, if they can clarify that.
It looks like the mezzanine's taken out because it's not there in the drawings. Right.
Well, I have a question in terms of understanding how the programming of the space will operate. The mezzanine right now shows there are 5 office spaces.
Right.
The proposed plan does not show a replacement office spaces, so I definitely would like to understand where these office spaces are going to be relocated within the premise, especially given there's so little space currently available on this site. I just don't want to see it on the plan. I want to be able to understand how it will operate.
Plus, the mezzanine reduces the floor area, which they're not showing on the zoning calculations.
The question is, are they going to be incorporating that corner into the zoning lot? It's currently in very poor condition as well. The fencing is all warped and bent and should definitely be replaced if they are considering adding that to the application. And could they detail their signage by frontage as well?
Okay. And then I noted that the hours of operation that they're requesting are different from what was approved and what's on the C of O. So if they're asking for a difference, they should be clear.
It seems to be lesser than what was originally granted, so that might be...
7A to 5:30. Yeah.
But I think in general, they just need to show what their operation really is, because it's very cluttered and crowded, and it doesn't really seem like you could effectively operate your business out of such a crowded space.
Okay. Also, I couldn't tell, maybe you could from the site visits, whether the landscaping was provided according to the plans? No, so they have to do
I
that.
didn't see any landscape. Wasn't right now.
And then one of the conditions of the grant is that all loading and unloading will take place within the building. But on the street, they actually have signage which says that it's a commercial loading zone. So I just wanted to clarify that there's not loading done at the curbside.
I don't see how they actually could load and unload inside the facility. It's pretty choco bomb.
Okay, and then also, the first grant required wall-mounted exterior lighting, which was obviously a safety, that's there? Okay. Okay. And just to clarify for the applicant, when you talk about what the conditions were of the first grant, they're not superseded by the second grant. The second grant adds additional conditions and incorporates the first set of conditions in. So I see that a lot with these applications. They're not superseded, they're incorporated.
Also, since they're proposing to tear down the mezzanine, I would like to get an understanding of the timeline of the demolition plan and roughly when they plan to start.
Okay. Next.
Item number 7, 20108BZ, 40-38, 216th Street, Queens.
Okay, I didn't have many questions. I just wanted to know whether any work has taken place on the site since the 2011 grant.
No.
Doesn't look like it.
But the site is not well maintained, and I'm just concerned that if they don't start now, I mean, the site is overgrown, and the fencing's in poor condition.
Yeah, do they have a
also-
time, I'm sorry,
Sorry,
There's-
go ahead.
do they have a timeline for, for what they're intending to do, and they can provide that to us?
Right, and if they have started any of the design plan, because the
Yeah.
plan that was submitted as part of the original approval, I'm not sure how it is connected to the existing building and whether it's even code compliant, because this is much, this plan was approved way back in 2008, so I think the building codes may have
Yeah.
changed. So we want to make
Twice.
sure that the
And
plans
updated.
are updated to the current DOB plans, and
Yeah.
if they're planning to start the construction, it would, I'm assuming they would have started looking at doing the architectural plans and the engineering plans, so we want to know what's the progress of that.
I don't think they filed yet. I
Right,
don't-
so,
No, they
So,
and this is this, had they started the construction and actually had footings in the ground, they arguably could have vested under the pre-2008 building code, right? But they didn't do that. So now they're subject to 2014 code. Okay.
Go on.
Not to mention any change in the zoning that might have occurred. I don't know if anything did. Don't know. There might have been text changes that affect the project. I mean, I don't know. They need to check because the plans are so old. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Item number 8, 23110BZ, 430, 440 Park Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay. I didn't have any issues with this. Did anyone else?
Can they provide our approved plan without any hand markups on it?
Oh, they did. I think that was
Did they give us a plan that
resubmitted.
did
Yeah.
not have I didn't see that, but if they haven't done it, could they do that?
My only question was if any of the surrounding uses have changed that may affect some of the environmental determination. When I had gone on a site visit, I had noticed some trucks that were parked inside the property. I'm not sure if it's construction related or,
Okay.
Item number 9, 2-11BZ, 117 7th Avenue South, Manhattan.
Okay. Also, I had no issues. Anybody else?
no issues. I don't think they provided the existing plan, so. Might work.
Okay.
Appeals calendar, decision items, item number 10, 3515A, 2001 Bartow Avenue, the Bronx.
We're actually going to reopen this to consider new materials that were submitted by both sides, but they've asked to postpone for a month.
So it's 322, right?
322.
Item number 11, 6515BZ on 6615A, 361 Central Park West, Manhattan.
Okay. I'm going to defer. I don't have to recuse when you defer.
We've just received a request to defer to our next hearing, which is March 8th, and we will do that, so I don't think you need to leave the room for that.
Okay.
Item number 12, 2016 748A, and 2016-749A, 10808 and 10810 Shorefront Parkway, Queens.
We're going to reopen this Build It Back program case to remove from the January 22nd approval these two properties.
Continued hearing items, item number 13, 163 14A through 165 14A, 502, 504, 506 Canal Street, Manhattan.
Okay. With this one, I guess I'm not gonna get into a lot of detail, but what we're talking about, we've been asking for months and months and months for physical improvements to be made, and hardly any of them have been actually done. We did see in December the floodgates installed, and we haven't seen proof, as far as I can tell, of the sump pump installation, though we were told it was installed. We haven't seen proof of that. There were many, many other things that were supposed to be done, some of which were recommended by the waterproofing engineer. Those were not done. So we were actually asked to close this and give them some kind of a leash, but I don't understand that kind of thinking. So instead, my recommendation is that we go through a list of items that need to be completed and give them a date certain when it needs to be completed by, and we'll close the hearing. And if these items are not completed by that date, then I would make a motion to deny the application. So, because we've been going at this so long, and there's been too much reluctance on the part of the property owner to actually make the corrections. So I'm just going to go through the list that, and please add anything that you think. So we need proof of installation of the sump pumps, but I think that Commissioner Montanez is going to add something that may mean that's a modification. The gas meters can absolutely not be located in the crawl space. They have to be located above the design flood elevation, as should all utilities be located above design flood. So we're going to need proof that they were installed that way. We need installation of all of the improvements that were recommended in the Vidaris waterproofing report, which I'm not going to list because there's a report. We need to be sure that notice is posted prominently in the common mail room for the tenants. We need to see a photograph that the notice has been posted. We've asked the fire department to take a look at an evacuation plan from the building. We have concern not just about evacuation in a flood, but also evacuation in the event of a fire. There's only one means of egress from these buildings. So they're going to be looking at that. With respect to the evacuation plan that was submitted, it noted something like the tenants will be advised of the need to evacuate. No, in this case, the landlord is responsible for entering into each building and making sure there's no one there anymore before they install the door shields. The window shield should be installed simultaneous with the aquafence. There's no reason to wait until the very last minute to try to install shields. They may take a long time. So the last thing in will be the door shield. Also, the evacuation plan has to state the location, the actual address and location of the storage areas for the aquafence and the shields. We've asked for that many times and it hasn't appeared. The plans must show the actual configuration of the aquafence, the way it was installed in that setup, as well as that the aquafence is to be anchored to the ground. Plans must show the location also of the ladders that are going to be going over, and there was a recommendation, I believe, by Vidaros about some kind of a sump pump between, or a drain of some kind between the the fence and the exterior wall because there will be water buildup. Actually, even Aquafence recommended something like that. Shields with neoprene gaskets are possible as opposed to the ones that have the runners if they pass an installation test. My concern is that because it's a historic property, the windows won't be square, the masonry openings won't be square, and so the neoprene may not be designed to accommodate an off-kilter. So, but if it passes the test, then I think they should be able to use the neoprene. A certificate of no effect from LPC will be required prior to the vote. Installation protocol, the installation protocol will be reviewed by the fire department and submitted to the BSA. The storage protocol will be reviewed also by the BSA. I had a question about how the Aquafence will be installed in the inner court of the building because they're big, and I can't figure out how you bring them into the building, because you have to go through the building with them, and then put them through the window? And then I just don't understand the physical aspect of doing that. Because it's one thing to show it on a drawing, and then it, of course, needs to be tested, which we know it wasn't. The legal instruments need to be reviewed by BSA counsel 1 month prior to the vote. That's the restrictive declaration, the lease rider, and the notice. The statement of facts has to be, and the plans have to be revised. So statement of facts must reflect that work is completed, as this is a legalization application. The plans have to be amended to show the actual location and setup of the Aquafence, as I said before. And then, which I'll let Commissioner Montanez go into more detail, per section 304, G304.1.1, there are 7 conditions for residential use per G304.1.1. And the applicant refers in their statement to 5 and states 3 of the 5 are met. The applicant only meets 1 of the 5 if they remove the gas meters and equipment above the design flood. They could comply with number 3 underfloor spaces if the floor of the crawl space was brought to be level with the sidewalk elevation. And they should also comply with number 6 and 7, which involves certification by an engineer and special inspections as appropriate. And then the plans for the window and door shields show the design flood elevation as plus 11, but it's actually 13. And the Vidaris report also is incorrect. It shows 12 instead of 13. And the other thing that I wanted to note was there was a note in I believe in the evacuation plan that said that the shields would be supervised by, I don't know, a certified property manager. That was not what we talked about. We talked about having an engineer certify their installation. So that I don't know what a certified property manager even is. So we've been talking about an engineer verifying that the installation is correct for months. But Commissioner Montanez, do you want to talk more about the hydrostatic pressure?
Well, I just think it would be a very good idea to, the crawl space is obviously below the level of the sidewalk. And I think it would be a good idea to fill in that crawl space with, maybe a reinforced concrete slab, which would improve the ability, stopping water from coming up through the water table into the building. And it is one of the requirements for residential buildings. I mentioned before...
Oh, shit, sorry. Sorry.
I've mentioned before that their statement and their reference to 304.1.1 is incorrect, and they didn't change anything. And when you go through the 5 actual physical requirements and then the additional requirement of having things stamped and certified by a professional engineer and then doing special inspections, which is what we should require for what we're looking for. You know, the way they have it set up right now, they don't meet any of the requirements. So as a minimum, if they raise the gas meter, at least they'll meet one. If they fill in the crawl space, they will meet two. Sorry. So I think there's still more work to do. And I think you kind of hit all the items that I had concerns about in your list. So, but some of the mistakes that we're seeing in terms of what's the actual design flood elevation really shouldn't be made at this
Yes.
time,
right.
after all this time.
But it occurred to me that the drawings that we keep receiving are the same drawings over and over again. And so they're not corrected. They're just resubmitted.
Right, and then,
So-
you know, the window and door shields, you know, were supposed to be submitted months and months ago to
Right.
LPC, and now they're telling us that they're going to submit them now.
Right.
Which is, I don't understand.
Right. But apparently they met with LPC many months ago and showed them both options.
Yeah.
And the commission said that they would be fine with both options. So it's obviously nicer not to have those rails installed if the neoprene works, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
I just had two questions of clarification about the aquafence protocol. It said that the storage was going to be in a secure facility owned by the property manager, accessible 24 hours a day, but it didn't say any max distance from the site this time, and I know that we
Right.
wanted it close to the site,
They did.
so.
And they suggest, they gave us yet a new address, which is about 4 blocks away. I
Right.
think I forget where it was. It's not Canal, but
Spring?
yes, something like that.
Right, so it just seems like the protocol should have a maximum distance, so then it doesn't yet change again, and then it's across
Right.
the river.
No, I would prefer it for it to be an address, a specific address, so everyone's on notice about where they are, and no one can say, I don't know, they got moved. And because if it's not where it's supposed to be, then because this is a short leash approval, right? They're going to be coming back regularly. We need to know where the shields are and that they're in the place they said they were going to be.
Right, and the other question I had was, it talks about, you know, now the trigger is the high tide warning versus flood watch or flood warning, so I just wanted them to explain that, because I think that I had not heard them refer to a high tide.
Right, that's true.
You
Yes.
know, warning
Fundamental difference
prior to
between
this,
all of
yes.
Right.
So they could explain that difference, that would be good.
Yeah.
Right, there was something they said about 72-hour notice of storm surge. I'm not really familiar with weather forecasting. Do you generally get a 72-hour notice of a storm surge? Is that typical?
Don't know.
I don't know, that, it would be great if they could clarify
Yeah.
those terms.
Okay. All right.
Item number 14, 174 through 17615A. This is Johnson Street and Mila Way, Staten Island.
Okay, sorry, just a second. The statement of facts lists criteria that need to be met for Mila Way. Those need to appear on the plans. They go through things like the surface of the fire apparatus access road, the load-bearing capacity of the road, the grade, signage. So that should just be copied and put on the plans. I'm also wondering, because there's such a complicated approval, so there's a DEC and CPC approval set also. I'm just wondering whether the criteria for those two approvals can be, or at the very least, the CPC criteria can be put on the BSA plan. So it just makes it easier for the Department of Buildings to have guidance about what to expect.
You want the note of the DEC number on the plan.
Well, the DEC number is on the plan
plans,
already.
yeah.
And at least then the DOB would be alerted to the fact that DEC is involved. But there are CPC criteria.
Right.
That those, instead of a CPC approval, because that's a little different, that's harder for DOB to get. if the same notes that are on the city planning set could be on the BSA set, then it's kind of a one-stop review for DOB.
Okay.
Anybody else on this?
Just that I just wanted to clarify that the gates going to Industrial Loop are going to be removed, because I thought I saw the plans in the hearing folder still had the gates.
Ah,
Put the wrong one. Okay,
they shouldn't have.
Right, the gates have been removed.
okay, so
I
I must have
believe.
switched them out. Okay.
My question is, Mila Way going to be open to public, or is it going to be just to access the businesses located in the property? And in terms of the circulation, Mila Way, I'm assuming is two ways. And when vehicles are going to exit Mila Way towards Industrial Loop, will they be required to make a right turn or left turn? So they have to make a right turn. So there's quite a bit of flow of traffic on Industrial Way, and it's not a wide road. So the question is how these trucks and the flow of traffic is going to operate.
So, like a right turn only sign, for example.
Right. And it wasn't quite clear from the plan whether there will be on-street parking permitted on the widened Johnson Street. It wasn't, I mean, it seems the proposal is to widen the Johnson Street, but it's not clear whether there'll be on-street parking on Johnson, so I would like some clarity. And the hours of operations of these facilities, because there is an option that's given that one of them could have retail type operation, and the vehicular traffic coming to a retail type operation versus a manufacturing is different, and I think we need to get a better understanding of the type of operation and the traffic flow that it's going to create from that. The other question I had, I was looking at the plan that was approved by City Planning Commission, and the dimensions that are shown there is somewhat still not, and I raised it earlier, it's still
Yeah,
not.
he hasn't responded on the.
Yeah, it's not consistent with the BSA plan, at least the way it is. The distance between the buildings and the wetlands and the properties have somewhat changed, but the floor area still remains the same. So somewhere something is moving, so we just need to make sure that we have a consistent set of plans that.
And I think we needed an updated BPP, was it?
Oh.
It was an updated BPP, I think, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we need that one also.
Okay.
I had emailed the applicant, I think a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Item number 15, 19715A, 32 Berry Street, Boulevard.
Okay, okay. Just in some general comments, the Department of Buildings, are they here? Should respond to appellant's argument that under DOB's interpretation, the border around the MX district would have less signage than would be permitted within the MX district itself. I'm not understanding DOB's dismissal of the impact on accessory signs along the border. I think they need to address that. My initial take is that I don't think the Department of Buildings has made a case, because I think that the text is extremely clear. If I look at it, first of all, from a planning perspective, M districts are designed to be progressive in nature. So the M3 is the most permissive, and then to the least permissive is M1. And M1s are usually the border between commercial and residential districts. And they existed before MX districts were created. MX districts are somewhat less permissive than M1s, but they are not R districts. So it's logical that border protections would be less strict between an M1 and MX, because that's kind of a step-down district, yet another layer in the transitional. I think this is supported by CPC's MX district report. In 1997, the MX District report states that the C6 regulations for signage strike an appropriate balance between the sign regulations of the R and the M districts. In particular, the CPC stated that it should be noted that residents living in a neighborhood zoned within a special mixed-use district will not have the same protection against the noise and traffic associated with industrial uses that is afforded by a residence or commercial district, as long as an industrial use is operating within the boundaries of the health and noise codes and the M1 district's performance standards and the performance standards, that use can operate within the special mixed-use district 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Therefore, a mixed-use neighborhood may not be the most appropriate location for residents seeking a traditional residential neighborhood. Mixed-use neighborhoods are, however, a dynamic alternative for persons seeking a more varied living or live-work environment. So I think if performance standards in manufacturing uses are not modified in the MX districts, then it's reasonable to interpret from that signage regulations wouldn't be modified in the MX districts. Also, I want to point out, and for me this is what is the most telling, that the district in question is an MX district, and on the maps described as M1, and on the maps described as an M1-2/R6A. So the definition of a residence district, which is what that reduced signage regulation applies to, is a residence district. This is in section 12-10 of the zoning resolution. A residence district, which is a defined term, includes any district whose designation begins with the letter R. For example, an R6 district includes any district whose designation begins with the symbol R. So that's clearly not what an MX district is. Unlike what DOB states in their submission, an MX district is not both a residence and a manufacturing district. It is a mixed-use district, which is defined in the zoning resolution as a district that begins with the letters MX. Also, section 11-122 in the zoning resolution lists all of the residence districts. The mixed-use district is not among them. Instead, mixed-use districts are listed under special purpose districts. There is language, and I want to point this out, that again, it's one of those classics. If they had intended the zoning resolution to regulate all signs where there was exposure to residential uses, they could have used language that you see elsewhere in the text, which says where residential uses are permitted as of right or by special permit, for example. That's not the case here. Also, according to the Department of Buildings logic, if the zoning resolution meant to protect residents in whatever district they live, 42-561 would have applied also to commercial districts, since these include a great many residences whose bedroom windows can be directly across the street from advertising signs under 42-561. I note city planning submitted a letter in support of DOB's position, and though I can appreciate that now that they think of it, they would have liked the text to protect all residential occupancies from advertising signs. For me, the way I read it, that's not what the plain meaning of the text says. Next. Are we speechless?
Somewhat. Perhaps I have a different take. I actually agreed with DOB's position on this. And although one may feel that perhaps it's not exactly the right outcome, but I read the plain meaning as being that this sign falls under 42-561 and would not be permitted, even though one might make the argument that it could or should. I don't read that there's much wiggle room. So
How do you read the plain
that
meaning?
there isn't wiggle, there isn't wiggle room in it? I'm reading the text and I don't necessarily see what your argument was, but I will take a look again, but I don't know. I don't know if anybody else has anything further
You
to say.
mentioned the City Planning Commission report, and I read through it, and I kind of came to an opposite conclusion, especially the text was very specific about how the sign regulation in an MX district needs to be applied, and that given the sensitive, the uses are going to be mixed, and there are going to be uses residential that is more sensitive, and therefore the text specifically required within the special mixed-use district a C61 signage be applied. So while it may have made the statement of a residential district may not see itself in a traditional, residential uses in this may not be a typical residential uses one sees in a residential district, but with regards to signage, it was very particular that it was going to be on a more on a conservative end of it, and by allowing only other signs and not advertisement signs. And I thought the city planning's letter was very helpful in clarifying some of my questions, especially with regards to how, and in an MX district, it's the alphabetical order that has resulted in MX district written as M then R, of the alphabetical letter of the M followed by an R. And then there are other clarifications. I thought city planning's letter was helpful in my ability to understand the text. There was only one section where there is a little bit of a contradiction in terms of what was there, and that is in as per 3260, this C1 allows non-illuminated signs, but C61 allows, there's a difference in the way that if you're in an M zone, other signs are up. It goes into the, I actually didn't bring the copy of it, but it says that if your other signs, all of the signs facing less than 165-degree angle shall conform with the sign regs applicable in C1 district, that is signs in M zone. But if you go to the C1 section, C1 allows only non-illuminated signs up to 150 square foot, and illuminated non-flashing sign up to 50 square foot. Whereas C61, and that's where the difference is. So a property fronting on M1 would be allowed to have other signs up to 150 square foot. That's non-illuminated, or illuminated non-flashing up to 50 square foot. Whereas a C61, you're allowed to have non-illuminated signs of 500 square foot frontage. So that's where there's a little bit of a difference in the signage amount with regards to other signs that would be permitted. In C61, you would be allowed more versus an M1 abutting a residential district or a district that allows residential use to have a much lower level. That's the only discrepancy I felt, but I think rest of the text, I thought the DOB's interpretation was good.
Well, but, so that's for me the most telling part, where if on the perimeter you're allowed to have much less signage than what's allowed on the interior, then if anything, city planning should have had some special instruction for borders on MX districts, but they didn't. And it makes no sense to me that you can have a much larger sign inside the district and inside the MX than you can on the perimeter. And so what that indicates to me is that city planning didn't think of this. They actually weren't contemplating the problem of this text, that the text isn't clear. Well, I don't think the text isn't clear, actually. I think the text is very clear, because when I read the text, I just look at, okay, it's a defined term. So what's the term? You go and you look up the term and it tells you what to do. It starts with the letter R. Doesn't. Starts with the letter M. And then I'm done. So I don't actually understand how you can get residence district out of a mixed-use district. So, given that we have definitions as opposed to a district in which residential uses are permitted. So anyway, food for thought. Anybody else?
Yes, but in this instance, the MX8 is made up of M1, 2, and R6A. So one can argue that although you could have differing residence districts, they're clear here that that we have an R6A and one has to respect that. So
Well, but
maybe
you
I'm not
also,
understanding.
because you're a residence district, but it's residents right next door or in the same building with manufacturing uses. So you're not being protected, like it says in the report. You're not being protected the way you would be if you were living in a residence district. So you're mixed, and you've agreed to be next to a facility where there's trucking going on and manufacturing of all different types, and it's annoying, and potentially, they're meeting performance standards, but that's true of all the M districts.
So you're saying that there's sort of a lesser standard in
Yes.
terms of, because it's an MX district, residential districts within that are not as or should not be.
They're
as
not
protected.
residential, so that's the point. They're not residential districts in there. They're mixed. It's not like there's little pockets of residence and then pockets of manufacturing. In the exact same building, there's manufacturing.
So how do
Next
you
door.
reconcile that you could possibly have something truly mixed, like manufacturing and residence within the same sort of structure? How do you separate that out? How could you separate?
You can't.
That's what I'm hearing.
So, right, so you can't separate it, and what city planning said is, people who live in these mixed-use districts want something different from their neighborhood. They want something where there's a different kinds of dynamism. It's not a bucolic street, tree-lined street kind of thing. It's something gritty. And so if it's gritty, then the signs naturally are gritty along with them. They're in the C6 range inside the district. But that's why it doesn't make sense that
But city
they're,
planning is now saying that you can separate it out.
that's what they're saying today, but I don't think that's what the text says, or what was
There is
intended.
a little bit of there is a consistency in terms of how the rules are being applied, in terms of, in a purely residential district, no advertisement sign, only accessory signs approved.
Well, it's very small accessory
It's
sign.
very small. Then in C zones, where mix of commercial, community facility, residential uses are permitted, in purely commercial districts, the sign requirements is much more generous in terms of the advertisement signs and other things, whereas in C19s and C1s, which is primarily residential with ground floor commercial, the signs are much more subdued in terms, the sign
Right.
requirement is much less. So there is a gradation of respect that's been given, if one wants to call it. When there is a residential use, the sign regulation that is progressively going with it is also restrictive, is more restrictive. So I can understand the same argument being applied in an MX district, which allows much more intense uses in addition to residential uses, where the sign regulation, while not strictly applying the residential sign regulation, it is applying a sign regulation that is somewhere in between, but not purely all advertisement signs. So it has respected that same kind of gradation of signage when residential use is infused with other non-residential uses. And so I see the consistency in that application of that sign regulation that is being applied in the MX district. And the M1 regulation was consistent regardless of whether it was an MX or a residential or a commercial. It just said whenever there's a zoning district that allows residential uses.
That's not what it says.
Then, but if this was.
It says when it's adjacent to a residence district, not adjacent to a district that allows residential uses. It's a critical difference.
Okay, fair enough.
The defined term versus the general use
So in this
collection.
case, special mixed-use district does allow residential district. It's the R6A in this case. And therefore, as I see it, it's because it's an R6A district that is allowed in the special mixed use. Therefore, it has to abide by that element of it cannot be within 165 degrees of a residential district.
I mean, it does make sense to me that because, an MX district could be made up of different things. So it makes sense to me that if one believes the premise that a residential district should have, say, more consideration, even if they're paired with a manufacturing, but that you accept the premise that residential districts typically are more restrictive, in terms of sort of nuisance and signage and that sort of thing. That if you are confronted with that you must sort of abide by the hierarchy of uses, and being residential being the higher one, so it's going to be more restrictive. And that in another MX district, you might have a different situation, and you might have a different outcome because you have, maybe a different mix of some kind.
But the mixes are always the same. It's you're allowed manufacturing and residential next to each other. That's what an MX district says.
And residential has, I think, should be respected. I mean, I think that's what the section really is trying to say, that one respects the residential district above the manufacturing. So.
You understand?
I'm torn.
Torn,
to be
okay.
honest. If you take the plain meaning of 42-561, it seems as if, okay, you're in an M1, and you're within 100 feet of the residential boundary, then no signage. However, if you were to read it that way, you do have that inconsistency in terms of the total amount of signage allowed within the MX. And so I believe that when you read the plain meaning and the plain meaning results in an absurd result, then you have to look at the intent. And so that's where I'm at. So I don't know if I can go with the plain meaning of the text. So I'm open to seeing what the appellant has to say in terms of the intent and its effect here.
I didn't really consider the definition of an MX district. I just took it at the face value that it contains a residential district, and then I follow along with the DOB and city planning. But now that I hear what you're saying, I think I'll have to, again, as Commissioner Otley Brown said, be open to further discussion and see if I can be changed, my mind can be changed.
Okay. All right. Lively discussion, more tomorrow.
More to follow.
Signs are so fascinating. Okay.
Zoning calendar decision items. Item number 16, 3114BZ, 165 Spencer Street, Brooklyn.
I think we're still waiting on the air quality on this. Are we? Just say yes or no? Yes?
Yes, we're supposed to decrease air quality on this today.
Okay.
Promise today. I don't know what
All right. Hopefully we'll get the comments today. Let's see.
technical emissions and everything.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Item number 17, 60-14BZ, 141-41 72nd Avenue, Queens.
Okay, 1 second. Let me just get the place here. Scrolling. Sorry. Okay. So I just want, for those who might be here from the public about this application, the school has to do a lot of work on the building, and in order for them to do the work, the Department of Buildings needs to have a permit. Otherwise, they can't go ahead with the work. So in order for us to enable the work to get done, we need to issue kind of a short, we call short leash approval, to allow them a restricted amount of time to get the work done. And that during that time period, we'll be watching and we'll be listening to any complaints from neighbors, and we can always, if they're not complying, we can always call them back in for a compliance hearing where we could easily then deny or overturn the approval. But the whole idea is that we move to the next step so that they can actually do the work, because without a permit, they can't actually do the work. And I just just wanted to note that there's a neighbor that says that the fence that's along the side doesn't belong to the school, and it's supposed to be the school's fence, so the school needs to install its own fence. Yeah, so that's...
I had a question about the photograph, a photograph that they submitted. They show that there's that locked gate at the side yard, and they have an exit stair that comes right up against that locked gate. And I'm wondering if that locked gate is not supposed to be necessarily locked. If there were an emergency, they would just get stuck on the stair.
They're supposed to be panic control. It's not supposed, they're supposed to be locked from the outside with a panic bar.
It was a padlock.
Yeah, they're padlocks with chains, right? So it needs to be a panic bar.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that I wasn't seeing something I thought I saw.
But the other thing is, they said that as soon as they do have approval to get a permit, that they would then shut the school down, move the kids off-site, and begin the construction work. So hopefully we're not thinking about this gate in operation for very long.
Right.
In operation where people have to really egress, other than, well, construction workers need an egress too, so,
Just concerned.
yeah.
The photos that were sent, there were items that were shown that were stored away within the property, some that belong, some of them definitely didn't seem like it belonged to the facility, but then there, in one of the fire exits that comes out of the cellar space, there were round tables
Yes, I saw
that were
that
stored
too.
away. And
Yes.
that's an emergency exit. Again,
Yes.
these are things we need to be very careful about and ensure they're never to be there and they have a separate storage area, which goes back to the question, like that space that is going to be used in the morning time as a prayer area, and then in the and once the prayer is completed, it will be used for the children's play area. I couldn't locate a storage area within the plan. I mean,
No,
there
they're
is
just
one.
pushing it against the wall and they're putting a screen up, basically, is what they showed on the drawings. They're just pushing the chairs up against the wall.
Right, the chairs are against the wall, but the children's tables and play things, I'm not sure where they're stored, and that, there is no storage room in that area. So again, this is not, shouldn't be one of those cases where it's outside and it's being
right.
dragged in. It all needs to be contained within the building. And I think a clarity on that one would be helpful. The other one is, as I was looking at the plan, and a lot of questions have been raised as to which is the easement area versus where the property area is and where the front yard is. It would be helpful if a site plan is shown that shows the property with respect to the side yard, the front yard and the easement, so we clearly have an understanding of the demarcated property area and where the front yards and rear yards are in relation
I think
to.
that 9-foot piece in the back from the rear line of the proposed building
Right.
to the rear property line
Right.
is the easement area. So though it's
Easement
their property, it's a right-of-way that they
Right,
have to keep
right.
clear. Oh, okay. And any other comments?
No comment.
I just, there's a bunch of conditions that I would want to have implemented in this short leash approval to allow them to proceed with construction. That would be the installation of sprinklers, fire alarm, and an interior elevator, the metal picket fence along the side yards with lock gate condition, but it would be emergency egress lock gate, the requirement that there be carpooling and drop-off controls and a DOT drop-off zone, and that once operations begin and the applicant returns for renewal or is brought back here on a compliance hearing, the board may require busing to avoid traffic congestion. Also, noise attenuation at the rooftop play area, no lighting or amplification at the roof, the use of the synagogue by adults only when school is not in session, supervision of the students on the grounds, maintaining the property free of debris and graffiti at all times and also during the construction period. All trash to be stored in the building interior and brought out only immediately before pickup. Side, front, and rear yard areas to be kept clear and free of debris. Again, debris is a real theme here. no storage of any kind in the rear stair or the rear alcove or in the right-of-way. Maintaining the construction site with a fence that surrounds the entire property and construction supplies stored in a neat and workmanlike manner, and repair of the rear drive in front of the property. And then also, there were some changes that needed to be made to the drawings. You have updated drawings?
He's not gonna have this.
Okay, no, okay, all right, so I have. So, when you do a floor plan is actually a section through the floor looking down. So when you cut your section, then everything that is at, say, 4 feet above that floor should be in the right location. And they're showing an elevator on the elevator entrance to the side yard as being from the first floor, but it's actually from what they call the cellar level, which I call the basement, but if the Department of Buildings is willing to call it a cellar, that's, So the location of the entrance to the elevator is on the wrong plan. Also, that's true also about the landscaping, because the landscaping is also at the cellar level. There needs to be a note that that the existing wall at the front of the building, where that staircase is, will be reduced in height and replaced with metal picket. That there's going to be metal picket fence all the way around the property, but I understand why it can't be in the rear because of the right-of-way, but that will be controlled. Access to that right-of-way will be controlled with lock gates. And that lock gate condition needs to be on every one of the gates with the fire egress. What else? On the side elevation, the side elevation doesn't show that there's an elevator bulkhead. It also doesn't show the locations of the fences. Then, what else? One other thing. Oh, the roof plan should show the actual layout of the acoustic fence. It doesn't. It just shows a section through the parapet and tells you one thing about the section, but it doesn't tell you the extent of that acoustical fence. And I think that's it. Okay. Any other comments? Sorry?
Are we reopening tomorrow?
Did we
was
close?
under
We didn't close
decision.
this. This is.
No, this was under decision.
Oh, this was closed? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay, so we're going to have to reopen to get the revisions. I mean, we need to get the revisions, and anyway, if there were some clarifications that we talked about today, we'll need to reopen to get those clarifications. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Next one? Item number 18, 12914BZ, 2137 East 12th Street, Brooklyn.
They made their requested changes and lowered the roof height a little bit. I just like a kind of a comment from others if they think that the height of the building is consistent with neighborhood character.
I didn't have anything further on the height.
I didn't have any issues with the roof height per se, but I did note that they still showed the greenhouse in the rear yard, and I thought,
No, we actually talked about it, and then we said okay to leave.
okay.
Uh-huh,
I was fine with the height.
okay.
Yes.
You're okay, too? Okay.
I just noticed one discrepancy in the zoning chart. The existing side yard is shown as 8.75, whereas the plan indicates 11 inches. This is for the side yard on the south side.
8.75 versus whatever,
8 feet 11 inches.
Versus, 11 feet, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Oh,
My bad.
you're bad. So wait a minute, so the
Yeah,
side yard of the proposed,
Yeah.
it shows the wrong
Shows the road.
side yard width?
Yeah. The chart shows it as the existing, as
Right, that was something
8.75 feet.
they argued before. They were measuring it from the bay window, but there's no foundation below the bay window. So I think they agreed that it was supposed to be 11 feet 6 inches.
Right,
Well, that's what it's showing in the proposed, that it's 11 feet,
okay.
which is fine. But then the existing, they're measuring it from the bay window, you're saying?
Yes.
That's what they
I
were
see.
doing,
Okay.
yeah.
But in any event, 11 feet is complying, so.
That's fine, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Shows them. Okay. All right, and then to just clarify, no, okay, I think that's it.
Item number 19, 9515 BC, 1203 Jerome Avenue, the Bronx.
Okay, I still don't have the community board recommendation on this. So we need it, but otherwise they made all the changes. Do you have the community board?
Yes, they did.
You saw it?
Yes.
Okay, all right, approved, good. Approved.
Item number 20, 16915 BC, 93 Ward Street, Brooklyn, Manhattan, sorry.
Okay, they made all the requested changes. They do need to incorporate all the criterion details. There were two, the reason I'm asking this is there were two sets of drawings. Either we merge the two sets, or no, actually, that's probably easiest. We'll just merge the two sets, so there's a criterion set of details, which is more detailed than what's in the BSA plans. So we need to have those same details on what's in the BSA plans. It doesn't require any work. Just merging the two drawing sets, okay? But what I would like them to do is include a detail for the column wrap for the wall ball, and to actually install that as part of the condition, because I don't like the idea that if there's a complaint from neighbors, then we'll fix it. The whole idea is we don't want there to be any complaints from neighbors. So, and Criterion had a suggested detail. Okay, anybody else?
Continued hearing items, item number 21, 32213 BC, 4201 Main Street, Queens.
Okay, they requested an adjournment on this. I think we should give them till the end of May to make the site improvements, including the planting, stuccoing, and painting of the interior walls, and the removal of all non-C of O related violations, instead of like continuously having them come back having not done everything.
Item number 22, 33013 BC, 2801 Brown Street, Brooklyn.
Also requested an adjournment.
Item number 23, 4114 BC, 21-37 Waverly Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, they requested an adjournment on this for several months, but I just wanted to say a few things. We went last week on an interior site visit where the building manager actually took us into many of the classrooms and some of the larger spaces like the synagogue spaces and so on. We requested there that they submit, prior to the hearing if they can, copies, sorry, excuse me, copies of contracts that they've actually entered into for the installation of fire alarms and sprinklers, and a work schedule, and also updated alteration plans, alteration type 1 plans. We noticed on this visit that there is a very extensive existing sprinkler system in place, which probably dates to a time before the school was established. It's at least 30 years old, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because sprinklers, I think, endure. The school, though, has been advised, because this is an alteration type 1, that they have to comply with 2014 sprinkler code. And therefore, it needs to replace all of that piping in the entire building, which is a huge amount of piping. So what we would like to do here is work with the fire department and the Department of Buildings to see whether that really needs to be done, because like most of these schools, they don't have a lot of money. And the other thing that we saw was there are a lot of other issues that seem extremely critical. So,
Was it piping size? Is that what?
yeah, so that's, they were told that, yeah,
Diameter?
the diameter, but at the same time, they had very large pipe at the beginning of the runs, and then the problem was that it stepped down too quickly or something like that. And we couldn't really tell whether it was, say, a sprinkler contractor looking for a really nice project, or whether Department of Buildings or Fire Department would allow them to just make some minor kinds of changes that would be significantly less expensive. So one of the things we noticed was, so for example, other than that, which is existing, no work that we've been talking about has been done, except above the bus service area, they installed sheetrock on the ceiling. And I just pray that it's a 3-hour rating, which is what was required. I'd like to also know from the fire department whether, that was just over the bus repair facility. On the rest of the rest of that first floor level, it's completely open wood construction where you can see the joists as the very high ceilings. They have to be 30-foot high ceilings. And that's completely open, exposed wood structure above the kitchen and above general storage areas. And I actually don't know whether that's allowed to have no further fire protection. I don't know what the rating of the wood structure is. It may be better because it's an old building. It may have a better fire rating than it would if it were a new building. In April, we were supplied with a set of plans that were the architect's recommendation about how to improve fire egress. On our visit, finding the fire exits was really, in a fire where there's smoke, I just don't know how people would find their way, and these are little kids. So the architect made some recommendations about fire corridors and things like that, which I don't know whether were reviewed by DOB or fire department, but I think that the improvements to egress, plus there are lots of holes in the ceilings that compromise fire stop, that kind of work really is urgently needed to be done. And there's also, they have a service elevator, a manual service elevator that they're proposing to be used to meet the ADA requirements. I don't know whether Department of Buildings would consider that okay. It's really an active elevator. It's hauling trash and supplies up all day long. So I just don't know how the ADA requirements are satisfied by that. And then what I'd really like to have happen is that the applicant, its architect, and if there's a contractor, meet with our staff and figure out how to move forward with this work. The impression that we get is though there's a kind of an expediter person, there isn't a general construction manager for this. So nothing is moving along with any kind of focus. And then in this meeting with staff, we'll try to have a Department of Buildings and Fire Department there at the same time to go over how this should be done. Anybody else? You want to add anything?
No, I think that covered it. No.
Okay. Item number 24, 26914 BZ, 8944 Metropolitan Avenue, Queens.
They asked to adjourn this.
Item number 25, 20315 BZ, 44 Union Square East, Manhattan.
And I need to recuse from this?
This time we will wait till you leave the room. Okay, so the applicant provided some responses to our financial questions, including explanation of the capitalization rates, but I believe that Commissioner Otley-Brown had some issues with that, as did I, and I will allow Commissioner Otley-Brown to explain a little bit later, but and more fully. But we were looking for, I think, a more reasonable explanation than what was given. The applicant also provided the board with DOB determination concerning loading dock requirements, but we still have some open questions concerning how deliveries and loading would occur on such busy streets, and that there isn't perhaps enough space to accommodate the additional deliveries. I know that they're saying that they would have 24 deliveries, which is 11 more vehicles per day than what is there currently, but I think a little more explanation as to exactly what the sort of the types of retail is expected, and how they really determine how many deliveries and the types of deliveries. Also, we had some questions about storage and storage of trash, and how internally the operation would accommodate the storage of trash. It appears that that first floor retail would have to accommodate the trash and circulation within the building on their own, and there's no real explanation as to how that would actually happen and what that looks like, and whether or not they've really calculated the amount of storage they need in terms of the trash and the circulation. Additionally, the applicant revised their EAS, as they say, to avoid adverse air quality effects, including relocating the hot water and heating flue, and only using natural gas. So first, why don't we tackle the B finding and the cap rates that were in question, and then we can go to the C finding. Commissioner Montanez and Commissioner Champa can tell us what their thoughts are.
Well, in the previous hearing, I had several questions for the applicant, and they addressed several of the questions. The one question that remains to be addressed in a more substantial way would be the capitalization rate between the lesser variance and the proposed, which are extremely similar projects except for the roof and the extra floor. And I hope that the applicant addresses that more clearly tomorrow.
Regarding the C finding, there's more explanation in terms of what is anticipated for the site. There's going to be 24 truck trips per day, and there's either going to be 1 to 4 retail tenants in the 44,000 square feet of retail. But I don't really feel, just in terms of making the C finding, I don't think there's a lot of explanation in terms of how the building's going to operate, in terms of unloading of materials. If they don't have the curb space next to their delivery door, how are they going to maneuver deliveries over the sidewalk? Even within the building itself, the circulation of trash and materials for storage seems confusing to me. It seems narrow corridors and a small elevator and a small trash room. I don't know how they came up with the size of the trash room in terms of what would be anticipated for this much retail space. And that actually the exit from the circulation space into the retail corridors is also, it's like a 3-foot door. It didn't seem to make sense to me. I'd like to know how the building's going to operate, both in terms of having 1 retail tenant and in terms of, say, 4 retail tenants. I understand that perhaps the tenants will have to put in their own additional elevator, but that wasn't really very well explained. And there's an area underneath the sidewalk, which on some plans is called a Con Ed vault, and on other plans is called storage area. So if they could explain how they're not going to have an impact on the sidewalks, on the traffic, on the pedestrians in the area, and accomplish all this unloading and maneuvering, and as well as handling the trash, I'd appreciate it.
So would you like to see this in plan form as well as in
Perhaps
sort
a
of a written
discussion, because I think it's different if there's 1 tenant versus if there's 4 tenants. Perhaps just explain, if there's 1 tenant, this is what we assume the tenant will do. I know the last time, I guess there was a comment made that it's really up to the tenants, but we need to make a
To
C
see
finding.
some sort of.
Yeah, some sort of planning or what they
Plan of
anticipate.
what it would look like.
Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Shonda? Nothing? All right. Let's get the motion.
New cases, item number 1, 11-15BZ, 155 Dover Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, note that the community board voted in favor, but there were 9 dissents, and we didn't see the reason for those dissents. I'm curious what they were. With respect to the rear yard and the other studies, just a request for future studies like this. It's really difficult to follow between the images and the maps when one of them uses addresses and the other uses tax lot numbers or site numbers. For instance, where is 168 Exeter that has the deep rear yard extension? You have to really scour around. Most of the time I end up using Google Earth to figure it out. Please coordinate those two data sources. There's also a coordination issue among the data that's provided. According to the existing site plan, side yards are 6'8" and 6'9", not 8'11" and 9 feet. But then the existing floor plans and the statement of facts all differ from the site plan. And the site plan shows the existing rear yard is 27'11", not 37'2", with a 17-foot 4-inch front yard, not 23 feet. The survey, which is difficult to read, does show a 23-foot front yard and one 8.9-foot side yard. Please help us.
It was really difficult. It was hard to read.
With respect to the cellar floor construction, is the new cellar construction below base flood elevation permitted? No. The cellar plans show a full bath adjacent to a room with windows and a layout that looks like this will be used for recreational areas. In addition to probably being prohibited by the flood regulations, this would count as floor area. Should show that the perimeter wall height and the overall height comply with the zoning regs. With respect to the .97 FAR request, there's only one house on the social block that has greater than 1 FAR, and that's probably not legal. Other BSA-approved houses on this block are .92 FAR. This house also reads more massively than .97 FAR because it will be lifted, has a high roof, and also because there is a double height foyer area. So I think the mass really needs to be brought down. With respect to the side yards, no non-compliance is being extended, but the house is massive, and as proposed by the side yard reduction, really crowds the site, I think. Increasing the side yard width would adjust to a slightly lower floor area and reduce the apparent mass of the house. With respect to the rear yard, the house to the rear is 22 feet, has a 22-foot rear yard. The houses adjacent have 30 feet and 40 feet, and the house to the rear adjacent at those houses is vacant, and another is 15 feet. I think the proposal at 24 feet, with a 24-foot rear yard with only the first floor extension is respectful of the neighbors and in keeping with what else is going on immediately adjacent. As to the 40-foot height to the roof peak, the house is much taller than its neighbors, especially considering it's only being raised 2 feet to accommodate design flood elevation. It should be lowered to comport with heights of the neighbors that are more like 35 feet. And then I always have a concern about the amount of removal of existing floor area. So from now on, all of these approvals where it's getting really close like this, we'll have a limit on the amount of floor area that can be removed without voiding the special permit. Anybody else?
Well, everything that you've said, but also, could they verify the pool and whether or not they comply with pool construction regulations? Because I had a very difficult time making sure that all of the dimensions were correct between all of between the survey and the plans and et cetera. So when they coordinate all of the dimensions, then just check that against where the pool is, because it was not clear to me whether or not they had enough space around the pool from the face of the building and also to their rear yard line. So they could just check that out. And yes, I did not understand the 3-piece bathroom in the cellar. That would have to be approved at DOB, and there shouldn't be a usable cellar. So, yeah.
Okay.
Can they clarify their statement? Page 4, the third paragraph under the proposed enlargement has to do with the elevation, and it's very confusing. It states the lowest occupiable first floor will have an elevation of 11.34 feet, and the next sentence says the proposed first floor has an elevation of 13.84 feet. So they need to clarify that.
Okay.
Regarding the cellar, well, first of all, I guess DOB will determine whether this work is considered substantial improvement. If it's considered a substantial improvement, they cannot keep any below-grade space. And they most certainly cannot create any new below-grade space, which they're showing. They also need to add a note that the cellar will be wet flood-proofed in compliance with Appendix G. So whatever they're showing there, you know, in terms of enclosed spaces and rec rooms has to be modified. They're measuring the perimeter wall height and the building height from the design flood elevation. Well, it has to be measured from the design flood elevation, not from the finished first floor. The roof exceeds the allowable envelope for R31. Dormers are not permitted. R31 limits the permitted obstructions. And I believe that roof, because it's sort of like a square roof with dormers sticking up, exceeds the envelope. The first floor is at least 5 feet above curb level, so they have to provide one mitigation measure. They show 2 parking spaces between the street line and the street wall, but they're only allowed to have a parking space if it leads to a driveway beyond. So one of the south, I think it's the south parking space is not permitted. So in terms of the cellar level and the below-grade space, I think they should just show a dotted line saying DOB to determine whether this is a substantial improvement. And then it would just be a hole for storage. It wouldn't really be a finished space.
Right, okay. Okay, anybody else?
No, I think you've all addressed my concerns.
Okay.
A lot of work.
Item number 2, 6715BZ, 338 West 23rd Street, Manhattan.
Okay, I didn't see a community board recommendation in the folder. I'd like to know whether there have been complaints about noise or crowds on the sidewalk. But we don't have proof of service. The folder in SharePoint is actually mislabeled and contains the environmental assessment, not proof of service. So we don't know whether neighbors were properly notified for this hearing. The drawings, I think, on the PDFs are difficult to read, so they need to resubmit a clearer digital copy. The statement of facts states that 65 persons attend the events, but the plan shows seating for 56. Statement of facts also states there is a mezzanine, but the plans describe that as the first floor, which is probably correct because the mezzanine is only 1/3 of the floor area below. In any event, the mezzanine isn't for theater seating since it's located above the stage. The occupancy should be limited to whatever the DOB rated capacity for the space is, even if it's less than 75. The quantity of the patrons should be limited based on that rated capacity of seated area. I'm trying to understand, why is the first level considered a basement since you're entering at grade? Maybe it's an inch below and hence makes the basement.
Makes the basement.
I'm concerned that the space also doesn't have sprinklers or fire alarms, although the applicant states these are not required by the building code, but if you have, 75 people squashed into that little space, that's scary. And I'm wondering if that's even correct for a new conversion of a non-fireproof building to this use. I'm trying to understand how the ticket check-in is handled. For instance, whenever I go to these little events, there's usually a person sitting inside at a table, and you either pay them or they ask for your name and then they check a list, right? I don't see where that person sits and checks, and how do you prevent lineups at that spot? So they're saying that everybody who comes to the theater comes inside, but that's not actually how most of these little venues work. You wait until you check in and there's a line outside, so I'm not understanding that. And then the front gate, which is at the sidewalk, is swinging opposite the direction of egress. So either its swing is corrected, but then you're swinging into the sidewalk, or they have to have something, I don't know how the fire department handles something like that, but that the gate has to be kept open for all performances, or maybe the gate's removed, or not sure how to address that. There's also only one means of egress, which frankly is always scary for these little venues. They should add a route that takes people to an area of refuge at the rear yard, at least, because there's like a 30-foot rear yard because it's really part of a house. And I'd like to know how the rear yard and the rear deck are used, since there doesn't seem to be access from the residential level above. So it must be that sort of events spill out into the rear yard. If that's what's proposed, we should know about it. And then also, how does the toilet room access work when the performance is in process, because it happens to be at the stage or stage area? Excuse me, sorry.
Gotta go.
Anybody else?
I was actually asking about the legality of that rear deck and balcony. I don't know how it actually got there. So is that, actually legal? I also had questions about the queuing, and whether there's queuing on the street. There shouldn't be queuing on the street, so maybe that's a condition, but that we would impose, but they should show an area directly inside that accommodates the amount of people that they say that they have that would be waiting to get tickets. So they need to show us that area. And then I too had questions about whether or not they needed to have a sprinkler and fire alarm, because I would imagine, I don't know, but I would imagine that eventually they would have some sort of production where they have some scenery or something like that, and that becomes, an issue, and you're supposed to have a sprinkle space if you have an F1B. So if you've got scenery, you got to sprinkle.
It's a teeny place. Mostly it looks like there are music performances, or somebody has a piano and that kind of thing. But of course, anything's possible at the theater.
What can I say?
I think you've picked up on most of the questions. I had one of in the plan, it shows that there's a dotted area that is indicated as a potential outside waiting area, but that's the area where the door, that gate swings in, and there are greeneries around it.
Mm-hmm.
So
There shouldn't really be an
after
outdoor
all
waiting
of that gate being open with there is not much space, especially with the greening spaces, that's the greenery that's there onto the left and the right. Once the gate is open, there is not any much standing area, definitely not for 65 people or for 55. So I think we do need to address.
I don't know that it needs to have space for 65 people, because you can let people come in.
Right.
It's not like in Broadway theater where they don't let you into the lobby.
Yeah, I think it's just the way the gate opens up. I don't think more than 3 people can get there.
Right.
Especially if there's so much of greenery on the...
Okay, anybody else?
And the deck that's in the back, there's a glass window and that's totally visible. So I could almost imagine there's a program that's going on and people could be sitting in the deck and watching the program from the outside and from the inside. And that's probably where your 65 gets accounted for. But, so I think those are, I would like to get a better understanding of the operation and the programming of the space and how the space functions. It is not a typical theater space, and so would really like to get an understanding of how one goes to the toilet while the function is happening. Or maybe it's part of the function.
Yeah, like alternative theater. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, next.
Visual image was just...
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
18715 BZ, 500-514 Lexington Avenue, Manhattan.
Okay, just to, they were upfront about this on the application, this is a legalization, but kind of not really. It was a nail salon before, and they've been operating since August, but they are going to allow in the future 2 massage rooms to be used. For these little applications, it's a shame that they actually have to come here as a PCE, frankly. But we do have fire department sign off. I don't know whether we have DOI. We do? I didn't find it. Okay, so have and DOI sign off. Anybody else? No? Okay.
Item number 4, 20215 BZ, 6469 Broadway, the Bronx.
With this one, I note that the community board, this one had a lot of opposition. Community board disapproved, and as did a number of elected officials, they were against the project. With respect, because it's a variance, with respect to the A finding, the unique conditions claimed are a combination of steep slope, subsurface rock, and contamination from the site's use as a gas station, plus detrimental reliance. So that's kind of asking from 2 different sides, right? But the application, I note also the application might have also come in as an interpretive appeal. I'm surprised it didn't, with respect to what kind of attended
What is
parking.
attended parking?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. So, but it didn't come in as an interpretive appeal, maybe unfortunately. So with respect to the physical conditions, I didn't find any letters from engineers, soil boring reports, or topographic maps to support their statement that the rock outcropping in this location affects the site differently from elsewhere in the study area. For example, what is the extent of the outcrop? They could have provided a larger topo map to show us that. Does it only impact the neighboring properties? Because they show that it's impacting neighboring properties. So to be unique, you don't have to be the only property that's affected, but you shouldn't be common to every other property in the area. That's also the case for the subsurface rock. I'd expect that there be subsurface rock everywhere along this sort of cliff, but maybe theirs is closer to the surface than the average. The photos also don't help to tell the story since they're taken from Broadway and the slope is hidden behind buildings. The survey actually shows the adjacent 9-story residential building being built to approximately the same depth as the proposed would be, given that the beginning of the slope is at elevation 45. And the parking deck on the other side of the property was built full to the lot line, even though the slope of the rock looks like it's cut out there, or maybe the building is built over the rock, which you see sometimes in parking garages, I don't know. The photos show that as of August 2015, when the application was made, this building was nearing completion. So the timing on the application results from the Department of Buildings audit in November of 14, at which time it required a full-time parking attendant in an attendance booth. By that date, 13% of the building had been completed, with 44% of the site construction and 37% of the concrete work in place. It isn't clear what the cost of that work in place was, or what work would have to have been removed to accommodate the very costly ultimate removal of rock to accommodate 8 parking spaces. A new building permit was first issued in June of 2014, and the ZD1 and approved plans attached to the ZRD1 shows 19 attendance spaces were going to be provided using 5 stackers. The DOB's audit in November 2014 made clear that to have the stackers, the parking must be attended 24/7. While I don't find the booth requirement in the zoning resolution, the 24/7 access for residential use is required, and that makes sense to me. This zoning resolution is also not specific that an attendant must sit 24/7 inside the parking facility. I don't know actually where that comes from. I'm wondering, with respect to that, whether this question was taken to the Commissioner for Technical Affairs, because it only went as far as the Borough Commissioner, and had they gone one step further, maybe they would have gotten a different answer. It seems to me it would have been less costly to do that. The proposal here, though, is not to eliminate all of the spaces, just to eliminate the 5 stackers, reducing the parking provided to 11. On-grade parking without the stackers is not possible due to the extreme slope of the site along a rock outcropping. The as-of-right proposal, as opposed to the approved plans, shows 9 spaces located at grade at the rear yard in an area cut into the rock outcropping instead of stackers. I'd say either way you go, both stackers or on-grade parking would be very costly to provide. So I think they have made a case that it's a very costly, that this requirement of the attendant parking creates a very untenable financial situation where there's very limited income from affordable housing, and the associated retail and community facility uses, or if they were providing on-grade, that it would cost really a fortune to cut back the rock and maybe even be dangerous to cut the rock. So the statement of facts, though, goes on for a bit about why the double-loaded corridor option wasn't feasible for the site, and says something about that being a shallower floor plate. I actually don't understand this at all. Double-loaded corridors have deeper floor plates. This is a single-loaded corridor. I don't know what they were getting at there. Zoning, the newly, recently city planning approved and still to be considered city council, at the city council, DQA text amendment would require only 9 spaces for this project. And then there was a study by Philip Habib that showed that the demand based on the type of use here in the ZQA EIS, they're relying on that kind of data, showed that demand would be very much more limited than what's proposed, or let's say 11 spaces are proposed, and then there would be a need for 9. I note that the site is about a mile from the nearest subway, but there's a bus stop right in front of the building. And I don't know whether we have DEC sign off yet. Okay, anybody else?
Well, I felt the A case was convincing to me.
Even without the,
Well, I went to the site and I observed the 9-story building to the right is a corner lot, and their parking is actually provided to the side, even though they have some similar rock outcrop behind them. They have the ability to take advantage of that side lot for their parking. And similarly, the multiple dwelling to the left,
it's a parking garage to the left.
well, the parking garage, I believe, is
Yeah.
owned by the multiple dwelling.
Oh, okay, to the left of that.
They
yeah.
also have a side entrance from the rear, and they're able to take advantage of, I guess, the layout a little bit better. But there was some explanation in terms of how the rock diminishes to one side. When you go there, you can actually, when you look inside the garage, the driveway, the rock is just right there. And the parking garage does have, it seems to be built on the rock.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The footings actually seem to be drilled into the rock outcrop itself.
And you can get away with that with a parking garage, but
Right.
not an apartment building. Yeah.
And just looking at that slope and those houses way up there with an existing 60-degree slope, I would really be rather worried about increasing the slope any further.
By cutting back.
Yeah.
No,
So I
it's very,
felt-
it's
Especially with
I
the
was able
building
to
in
get
place.
up on Post Road
Oh.
and to look down, and you can see that
And
it's
some of
just
the
so sheer.
slope, some of the slope is not even on their property. Some of the slope
Right.
is on the property of the homes to the rear.
Right.
Right.
So how do
Property
you
line is-
get on their property and start controlling this excavation? So,
Yeah.
And to do that, even if you could do that, I would be very wary because as you move north on the site, it really gets very steep. I mean, it's almost like a sheer wall. And to be able to maneuver onto it and keep it stable would probably be almost impossible to do. I mean, it's very scary up from when you're looking from Post Road. It's like,
I thought the best option had been, what they originally proposed was to put in some stackers.
Yeah.
You know, maybe not the triple stackers, but the double stackers.
Right.
To provide the parking spaces. And I didn't really see the Department of Buildings change of, operating approval. You know, that you had to have a booth and you had to have a person right there. That seems rather ridiculous if they have a live-in superintendent.
Right.
Who can be there to,
I'm not sure that there's a real basis for having to have a booth there. And I didn't see, but did they give us drawings that were attached to their ZRD1?
Yeah.
Did we see that? Maybe okay.
Yeah, so the
I missed that, but I
ZRD1
didn't
had the
see-
19 spacers with 2 and 3 stacker units. They were providing the required 19 spaces.
But
Right.
they didn't provide an attendance booth.
No, they didn't
No.
provide a booth because they were
So-
told in the previous 3
That they didn't-
interpretations that it would be okay to use on-site staff. So, yeah, I'm just
Yeah,
curious.
there was a more recent ZRD1, the last one.
The last
that said-
from the
one,
borough commissioner.
That said,
said-
according to the plan, it was, so I didn't see the attached plan
oh,
to
okay.
that ZRD1.
So it was this, I think that one was more that they were getting an interpretation on whether they could have staff-attended parking,
Yeah.
in-house staff, but not devoted. Yeah, I just,
Just the, it's a zoning variance that's
Yeah.
before us, not an interpretive.
right,
Right.
right, unfortunately, no, but that's,
And I'd also add that the discussion of the timing was actually something that at staff level, we wanted them to put in because of the way the EAS and the environmental is constructed. We're actually looking at the existing building as in terms of its construction as their no build with parking versus not, because that's because they had to then finish it because of the timing of the permits. That actually, rather than our usual variance construction where it's nothing or the variance. And so here we're looking at
oh, I
The
see, with the
building
no
with or
build and the
without.
vacant lot.
the no build, we accepted a no build with the building because they'd already started that
Right.
construction. They have the building, but then it interferes with their program to actually comply.
Well, that's in part why a detrimental reliance argument is maybe easier in the variance process, because
Yeah.
you have a built building and they relied. But then normally with detrimental reliance, you want them to go all the way up the chain of command, right? And they didn't. So they only went as far as borough commissioner, where technical affairs might have had a different response.
Should we tell them to go back?
I mean, no, because they're here for a variance.
Yeah, they're
I
here
would
for a
just have to
variance.
say that it would have been a cleaner application let's say, detrimental reliance, because then the EAS is more easily compared to
Right.
a built building. But in this case, that's the facts of the
Yeah, that's just the
situation.
facts of
They're
the
facts. They're not going to
situation.
tear the building down
Right.
because of those spaces.
Right. And so, it just gets to do they have an A finding? Do they have a B?
Right,
Are they
right.
sort of checking those boxes?
Okay. So I actually had wanted them to provide more, the data they probably already have, which is the board reports and things like that, to clarify what they found.
Yeah.
But it sounds like Commissioner Montanez is satisfied with
Yes.
that. So
Well, I am.
based on what you
Probably
look
for
at.
a more complete record.
Yes.
They should provide that information to us, because we request that of all other applicants.
Yes, right. Okay. Anybody else?
I just think the arguments are pretty compelling. The site condition, again, back in HPD, we have had projects in this kind of situations where we ensured that construction was done around these boulders and not drill into it, because financing was a big challenge. And if it required, in this case, which has happened, instead of having a double-loaded corridor, doing a single-loaded corridor, because the building footing cannot be drilled into this structure, which is an added cost, they reverted to a single-loaded and increased the height of the building. So I think it's a very compelling argument, and it's kind of unfortunate that the determination of the parking regulation is what's bringing it here, which from various senior housing projects that I have been involved in, we have always heard that the parking space remains vacant.
Yeah.
And we end up building these spaces, they end up remaining vacant most of the time and are not reused for a better purpose for the residents of the building. And sometimes some of these senior housing providers do provide services. Some of them also provide like drop-off pickups, and I don't know if self-help
Like
does.
little vans that,
But the residents of the buildings are not every day stepping in, stepping out, going to work, and so the vehicular ins and outs and travels is not going to be significant, other than those who are coming to work or occasionally visiting. And so I think there's enough data out there that clearly states that the demand for parking for such living senior housing is not significant, and I think it's quite compelling, the arguments.
I just wanted to point out one thing. There was a letter from the former community board chair, who's no longer on the
Right,
board, so
yeah.
she was speaking as an individual, but where, you know, they kind of were marveling at the fact that, not necessarily in a good way, but they were marveling that up until this point, all 19 spaces were going to be provided. So what she was saying was, isn't there a way for the BSA to instead waive the DOB's view about whether you need it to be a 24/7 devoted attended parking? And the problem with that is, for one, that question isn't before us. That wasn't the way the denial read. It didn't say denied because you need 24/7 attended parking. And it also didn't come to us as an interpretive appeal. So the only way we can review this is as a variance of the parking regulations.
But if financially they can accommodate a stacker and there's demand for it, and if that was the action before us, I agree.
Right, but unfortunately, we don't have any mechanism here to review the 24/7 attendant question.
Right.
So, okay.
That concludes the review session for February 22nd, 2016.